My name is Violet. I used to think the worst part of a marriage was the silence, but no, the worst part is when the hand of the man you once called husband leaves a mark on your cheek, right there in the living room, in front of his whole family. And his mother laughs like it's part of the evening's entertainment. I stood there, blood pooling in my mouth while they raised their glasses to toast a successful deal. What they didn't know was that my father, a retired federal agent, was standing right outside the door. And he didn't come alone. Have you ever been hurt right in the middle of your own family? Share your story in the comments. If you believe this is a story worth hearing, hit like, subscribe, and walk with me through the rest of this journey. Because that night, it wasn't a slap that echoed. An entire empire began to crack. I met Ryan for the first time at the hospital where I worked. He walked in wearing a navy suit, a light gray tie, and a smile gentle enough to disarm me. His mother, Evelyn Brennan, had come out of heart surgery, and I was the nurse assigned to her recovery room that day. "You're the one who sang my mother to sleep?" Ryan asked, half joking, standing outside her room. I blushed a little. It was a soft tune to help her relax. A lot of elderly patients find it comforting. He stared at me for a long moment, as if he hadn't seen someone like me in that environment before. Then, with practiced kindness, he said, "I don't think my mother's ever had someone care for her like that, thank you." At the time, I believed him. I'm a pediatric nurse. The pay isn't great, the work is exhausting, but I love every breath of it. The post-op kids, the tiny hands gripping mine at 2 a.m., the exhausted parents who just need someone to explain things in plain English. Ryan was different. He worked at a prestigious law firm, his career path paved smooth. He was used to cocktail parties, curated words, and women who looked like they walked out of fashion magazines. And yet, he chose me. "I don't care where you come from," he once told me when I hesitated to talk about my hometown in Montana, where my mom taught elementary school and my dad was still a federal investigator. "I care about who you are." I believed that was true, too. We got married 10 months into dating. The wedding took place at the Brennan's estate in suburban Connecticut. White flowers, a classical quartet, high-profile guests. Evelyn stood next to Ryan the entire time, her arm looped through his as if she were the bride instead of me. She picked everything, from the scent of the candles on the tables to the entrance music. "She's got no taste," I overheard her saying as I tried on dresses, "but at least she seems pliable." I laughed it off. I'm not marrying her, I told myself. I'm marrying Ryan. After the wedding, I moved into a house owned by Evelyn, though Ryan introduced it as their home. I didn't question it, not when everything still felt peaceful. Then, a few weeks later at dinner, Ryan set down his fork and knife, his voice calm, like he was negotiating something perfectly reasonable. "I think you should quit your job, just for a while, to focus on the family, get settled, prepare for kids. You don't need to wear yourself out anymore." I froze. "But I love my job, and I'm not planning on having kids anytime soon." Ryan gave a soft smile, placing his hand over mine as if to soothe me. "I know, but Mom thinks it's the smart move, and I agree." From that moment, I felt myself slowly being removed from my own life. I gave up overnight shifts, then weekend shifts. Then came the unpaid leave, which Evelyn conveniently already had the forms for. "You need time to adjust to your new role," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "As the wife of a Brennan, you can't be running around like regular staff." Whenever I spoke up, Ryan would say, "It's only temporary. I'll take care of the finances. You focus on the house, on us." But I didn't want temporary to stretch into forever, and I especially didn't want to disappear behind a title. I began to notice I didn't have a bank card in my name. The joint account, as suggested by my mother-in-law, was a more transparent and safe approach for an ideal family. My spending was closely watched. Every item needed a justification, from the cost of an essential oil diffuser to a cookbook. "We don't need more candles," Ryan said. "Mom already sent a box." And I didn't dare mention that I was allergic to the scent, or that I hated the white lilies scattered around the house. They reminded me of my grandmother's funeral. I learned to stay quiet during meals, to sit close to the exit at family gatherings, just in case I needed to slip out when Evelyn started recounting Brennan legacy stories, glancing at me every time she emphasized the word class. Isolation doesn't always need force. It creeps in when you start hesitating to call your parents. Unsure how to explain why you have no time, no space, no self left. I don't remember when I began asking permission to go grocery shopping. Or when I stopped laughing too loudly for fear of damaging the image. Or when I started whispering to myself, maybe I'm asking for too much. But one thing I know for sure, no one in Ryan's family ever thought I'd push back, and they definitely didn't expect that it would all begin with a slap, a single humiliating moment. That woke up a part of me they'd worked so hard to silence. One autumn afternoon, while reorganizing an old bookshelf in the reading room, a space Evelyn claimed was too messy for guests to see, I accidentally touched a wooden drawer at the bottom shelf. The handle was rusted, the lock stuck, but a gentle twist, and it popped open. Inside was a worn leather notebook, the spine fraying, pages yellowed. I was about to set it aside, until I saw the faint name on the first page, Eliza Brennan, Ryan's grandmother. I had never met Eliza. She'd passed away years before I married into the family, and no one ever really mentioned her. All I knew was that she had been a wartime nurse, a strong, independent woman, and Evelyn's first mother-in-law. I opened the notebook, never expecting those shaky, handwritten lines to be the first step toward the truth they had hidden for so long. If you're reading this, then maybe you understand. Evelyn hasn't changed, she's just learned how to hide it better. And when she can't control someone, she finds a way to erase them. My heart sank. I flipped to the next page. I believed strength alone could carry me. I was wrong. But even strength wears down when you live in a house where every decision gets twisted into bad judgment. I sat on the wooden floor, the journal resting in my lap. The following pages detailed how Eva Lynn had financially manipulated the family for decades, coercing her husband into signing documents without reading, pressuring her eldest daughter to forgo college to take care of the house, all because she feared the girl would outshine her brother. And suddenly I began piecing together the scattered fragments of my own life. 2 months ago, when I suggested returning to work part-time, Ryan said, "This isn't the right moment, Violet. I'm in the middle of negotiating new investments for the charity fund. Mom wants us to keep our image intact." "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged, as if it were obvious. "I mean, if you go back to work, you'll be too busy. You won't be able to attend community events or show up at fundraisers. It doesn't fit the current strategy." I said nothing, but that night I began checking through the financial records, and I found mortgage loans in Ryan's name, tied to the address of the house Evelyn currently lived in, the house she always claimed was an heirloom, untouchable. I wasn't allowed access to our online banking, but I happened to see a notification on Ryan's phone. Share transfer confirmation, Evelyn Brennan to Ryan and Hannah Brennan. My name wasn't anywhere, not a single line, not one mention of Violet. That same day my phone started having issues. I reconfigured it to help sync both of our schedules, Ryan explained when I noticed calls from old friends were going straight to voicemail. I checked my email. Most class reunion invites, messages from friends and former coworkers had been flagged as spam or no longer existed. When I tried to email my college best friend Allison, I discovered her address had been blocked. "I didn't want you getting overwhelmed," Ryan said when I confronted him. I remember his eyes then. No anger, no cruelty, only the practiced calm of a man who thought control was care. One night I overheard Evelyn on the phone in the study. Her voice was sharp, clear, though she wasn't speaking loudly. "We have to make sure she has no access to the fund. Everything is under Ryan and Hannah's names. Financial security is the top priority. There's no room for sentiment in matters like this." I wasn't sure who she was referring to, but deep down, it felt like she had just read out a sentence for me. I went back to the bedroom and picked up Eliza's journal again. I used to think if I kept quiet, if I endured, I'd be accepted. But Evelyn doesn't want a good daughter-in-law. She wants an audience. Someone who stays quiet while she shines. That night, I sat by the bedroom window, staring out at the immaculate garden Evelyn had professionally maintained. Every rose bush trimmed perfectly, every path laid smooth with stone, but not a single flower I had chosen. I wasn't allowed. That house had never been mine, and maybe they had never seen me as part of the family. But what Evelyn didn't know was that I still had people. And I still had memory. The memory to see the power play they were painting. And someday to paint over it with colors of my own. I began to wonder, was I living in a house where every door was painted with promises, but locked with control? Ryan was no longer the man I had once loved, but he didn't hit me, didn't scream, didn't leave like the husbands I'd heard about in stories of toxic marriages. Instead, Ryan used a different weapon. Do you really not understand what I need, Violet? He said that one morning when I brought up wanting to return to part-time work at the hospital. I'm carrying a whole slate of projects preparing to negotiate with the grant board, and you still want to work night shifts in pediatric? I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, trying to hear whether there was any care for me in that question, or if it was simply judgment. I need a partner, Violet, not someone clinging to some low-paying job just to prove her own worth. I heard the word disappointment in his voice. And worse, I had started to believe it. That if I tried a little harder, if I were a little less stubborn, maybe things would go back to how they were. But how they were was when I was still whole. Now I was a smaller version of myself, quiet, faded, constantly apologizing for things that weren't wrong. I came home after visiting my mother's old church, carrying a hand-stitched cloth she had left behind. A small cream-colored piece with delicate lace trim and a simple line embroidered. Wherever you are, be all there. My mother had lived by that phrase. She taught school with quiet dedication, cared for my father after his stroke without complaint, and every winter sat by the window mending my coat buttons by hand. I wanted to lay the cloth on the bedside table, a tiny detail but something that was still mine, in a house where nothing felt like it belonged to me anymore. 2 days later, it was gone. I lifted the tablecloth, checked the drawers, even asked the housekeeper. No one knew. That night when I asked Ryan, he shrugged. Maybe Mom had someone replace the furniture. I froze. Replace what? And I walked into the bedroom. The bed had been swapped for a modern black metal frame. The dresser replaced with something taller and glossy. The pillows, sheets, bedside lamps, rug, all different. There was a strange scent lingering. The expensive room spray Evelyn always used at her own house. I turned to Ryan, barely recognizing the sound coming from my own mouth. Who gave your mom permission to do this? Violet, he cut me off. You're overreacting. She thought it'd be a nice surprise, a gift. She wanted to help freshen up our space, no harm intended. I said nothing else. I just sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the polished hardwood floor, feeling like I'd lost the last root holding me in place. The necklace incident happened a few days later. The Brennans hosted a small gathering, called it a family evening, though it was really Evelyn's chance to showcase her talent for preserving tradition. During the party, Hannah suddenly frowned and looked down her blouse, then shrieked, "Grandma's necklace, it's gone!" Everyone turned toward her. She rummaged through her purse, checked the sofa cushions, then spun to face me. "You were the last one near me when I took my coat off." I stood frozen. "What are you talking about?" Ryan stepped in. "Let's stay calm. It probably just slipped somewhere." "No way," Evelyn said sharply. "That's the only piece we still have from Eliza, and only someone who doesn't value tradition would touch it." All eyes landed on me. My palms went cold. "I didn't touch anything," I said slowly. "Then why do you keep going into Mom's study lately?" Hannah challenged. "Or do you think if you find something of Grandma's it'll magically connect you more to this family?" I felt the blood in my veins go still. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I took my phone and considered calling my father. The screen glowed in the dark as my trembling hand hovered over the call button. His name still sat in my contacts. Dad, Warren Ellis. I tapped it. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then his voice, warm, familiar, answered. "Hello, this is Warren." I opened my mouth, but no words came, just the weight in my throat. I hung up. That same night, I logged into email to respond to the utility provider, one of the few responsibilities I was still allowed to manage. A warning appeared. "Your account was accessed from an unfamiliar device in a different location. If this wasn't you, please reset your password immediately." I clicked for details. The login history showed an IP address from the law firm where Ryan worked, had accessed my personal savings account, the one I'd opened before we got married. I walked out to the living room where Ryan was reading papers. You accessed my bank account? Yeah, don't worry, just consolidating finances. Makes things easier, we're married, Violet. That's not a joint account, that was mine before the wedding. Ryan set the pages down and looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. Don't start that I need my own space stuff again. This is a family. You're part of a system. Don't make me doubt your willingness to share. And that night, for the first time in months, I returned to an old habit. I began writing everything down. Every word, every expression, every time I was told I was too sensitive. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all, but I knew one thing. Memory was still mine. And they hadn't figured out how to erase that. I started waking up earlier. Not to make breakfast for Ryan and not to maintain the image of a good wife as Evelyn used to advise, but to relearn how to live as an independent human being, in silence. I enrolled in an emergency medical training class every Tuesday and Friday morning at a training center in the suburbs of Stamford. Under the label of Advanced Skills for Nurses on Career Pause, the class attracted quite a few women like me, those who had stepped back for marriage and were now taking tentative steps to return to themselves. I didn't tell Ryan. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., got ready in the dark, and took the back road behind the garden. Each morning I stepped into that classroom, I felt like I could finally breathe. In a space where no one cared if I wore a wedding ring or had ever been called too sensitive. Only real people and real skills mattered. In the second week, a flyer sitting neatly in a hallway bulletin rack caught my eye. On a white background, printed in simple blue letters. Do you feel your finances are no longer in your control? Join our free private consultation every Wednesday, completely confidential. I tucked the flyer into my bag without thinking much of it, but that night I opened it and read every line like it had been written for me. There was an address, a registration code for anonymous appointments, and something I hadn't dared to believe until then. You have the right to reset your boundaries. The consultation took place in a small room behind the administration building. Simple fabric chairs, warm yellow lights, and no name tags on anyone, except for one person. I recognized her the moment the door opened. Tessa? I blurted out. The woman turned, froze slightly, then smiled wide. Violet Camden, is that really you? Tessa Clark, one of my father's former students at the Legal Academy. Years ago, I'd met her a few times at family dinners. Back then, she was a diligent law student with thick glasses, always asking my dad about sensitive civil case files. Now, she was a lawyer and one of the leading specialists in protecting women from financial control within marriage. I didn't think you'd remember me, I said, a little shy. Tessa tilted her head. Your dad inspired me. He talked about you all the time. But I didn't expect to meet you here. I didn't expect I'd need to be here either. Tessa didn't ask further. She poured some water, handed me a blank packet, and said gently, Then let's begin with what's felt off to you. I started writing. Timelines. Small but complete changes in daily life. Times when I no longer got to choose my own meals, my favorite chair in the house, or even access to my personal email. Tessa read, nodding, occasionally making notes. When I explained the incident of my private bank account being accessed, her eyes narrowed. Did you save the alert email? Yes, I printed it out too. I pulled a thin stack of papers from my bag, all clearly marked with date and time. Tessa flipped through them, quiet for a moment, then said, Violet, this is high-level financial control. If you're ready, I want to help you. I hesitated. What if? I already have enough evidence. You don't need enough, you need to begin. Tessa looked me straight in the eye. If you have photos, recordings, or any documents showing coercion, pressure, or forgery, we can build a case. I nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weak for telling the truth. From that day, I started documenting everything. I installed a hidden recording app on my phone, tucked beneath the lining of my handbag. I took photos of Ryan's texts whenever I didn't answer within 10 minutes. I wrote nightly journals detailing expressions, words, actions I used to dismiss as just little things. One afternoon, when Evelyn asked me to sign a few administrative files regarding Hannah's investment portfolio, I quietly saved a scanned copy. The next day, I brought the printout to Tessa. She glanced at it and frowned. "Are you sure this signature is yours?" I shook my head. "It's a pasted signature. They used an old sample, but I never signed this document." Tessa carefully placed the copy into a folder. Property transfer forms like this require notarization from an independent third party. If that's missing, and there's evidence of forgery, we can press charges. I still hadn't told my father, but some part of me knew he wouldn't be surprised. He once told me, "Evil doesn't always come with a face. Sometimes it wears a button-down shirt, smiles, and says it's for your own good, for the family. That's why, kiddo, you've got to learn to see deeper." I had seen deeper, and I had seen enough, not to fight with rage, but to prepare, like a seed pushing through dry soil, not needing applause, not needing to be seen, only needing light. The first news appeared on a local paper. A small article, tucked between headlines about real estate trends and school snow closures. Brennan's Foundation under suspicion for laundering funds from unidentified sources. Evelyn didn't mention it at breakfast the next day. She simply sipped her Earl Grey from a thin gold-rimmed teacup and said, as if discussing the weather, "We'll need media stability in the coming weeks. The family needs to present unity, strength, and immunity from petty rumors." I sliced my bread, spread a bit of salted butter, and wondered how many women had been buried beneath phrases like petty rumors. 2 days later, Ryan made dinner. He had never done that. Even for simple pasta, he once said, "Brennan men don't waste time in kitchens." Yet that night, he wore an apron, earbuds in, stirring sauce like it was the most natural thing. "Surprise dinner," he grinned, pulling out my chair. "Because you deserve it." I looked at the pan-seared salmon in lemon butter sauce, plated like something from a restaurant. "What's going on, Ryan?" I asked bluntly. He set down his fork, tilted his head, voice softening. "I'm sorry for being stressed lately. Maybe I've been distant. I want to make it right." I looked into his eyes. I wanted to see how far he intended to carry the act. "Evelyn needs you. The family needs you," Ryan continued. "As someone who used to be a nurse, you have the perfect image to represent the foundation during this crisis. People will trust you." "Trust me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Because you're sincere," he said. "You're kind, committed. You're not tied to politics or money. You're what the public wants to see right now." I set down my knife, voice dropping. "You want me to be your mother's mask?" Ryan didn't argue. He let out a long breath. "I know how that sounds. But this is a chance to make things right. If you help us this time, everything will be okay." I leaned forward, hands on the table, and said calmly, "You want me to stand in front of the media, speak on behalf of the foundation, sign statements, and assure the public that this family has no connection to the questionable donations?" "Just a few events, a few press briefings. You're more than capable," Ryan said, his eyes carrying a hint of pleading. I gave a slight smile, bowed my head to hide what I was really thinking. 3 days later, Hannah sent me an email with the subject, "Fundraiser for Underprivileged Children. We need you there." The body of the message read like a polite invitation, but I knew exactly what it meant. They needed me to smile, stand beside Evelyn on stage, and give the press a photo that could bury a few rumors and save the Brennans' reputation. Sure, I'll be there. But before that, I sent another email to Tessa Clark. Attached were full recordings of all conversations about the Violet Image strategy to protect the foundation, along with the scanned invitation and a video clip of Evelyn coaching the media coordinator. "Make sure she smiles, warm, but not too confident. We don't want her outshining me." The night before the event, I sat in my room flipping through the documents Tessa and I had gathered, each recording a sharp blade. Evelyn discussing how to cover up funds from an untraceable contractor, Ryan talking with a lawyer about removing Violet's name from the assets if things blow up, and even a video of Hannah joking, If this gets out, we'll just say Violet had a mental breakdown after the miscarriage. Easy. I had miscarried 6 months ago. Not one person in that house had asked how I was feeling. Oh. On the day of the event, I wore a navy blue dress, one I chose, not Evelyn. I stood in the Hilton ballroom under a chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, surrounded by reporters, cameras, fake pleasantries, and champagne whispers. Hannah walked over, cheek to cheek, greeting me like we were close sisters. "You look radiant, Violet. This is exactly the image the foundation needs." I took the pre-written speech they'd prepared for me, but I didn't read from it. When I stepped on stage and the microphone was handed to me, I looked out over the audience, Ryan, Evelyn, Hannah, and hundreds of eyes watching, and I started speaking. Not from the draft, not by instruction. Every word I said was real, about compassion, honesty, and the importance of transparency in charitable work. I didn't call anyone out. I simply asked, do those leading our foundations possess the integrity to be accountable to the communities they claim to represent? A reporter raised his hand. "What are your thoughts on the allegations of money laundering in the Brennan Foundation?" I looked directly into the camera. No act of goodwill can stand if it's built on concealment. Evelyn lifted her teacup, but her hand trembled. I stepped off the stage, walked straight into the wings. No one stopped me. And I knew. The game had begun on my terms. That day, I didn't have to set a trap. They walked right into it. Tessa was already in the press room next door. My father, Captain Warren Ellis, had been added to the guest list under a different name, quietly watching from the back row, and every camera was rolling. After the fundraiser, no one spoke during the ride home. Ryan gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. His face twitched in rhythm with the red and green lights on the road. No music in the car. No words. Just the thick, silent pressure of a storm waiting to explode. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, I opened the door before he even cut the engine. "Violet," Ryan called sharply, "we need to talk." I didn't look back. Then talk. He rushed in behind me through the foyer. "You pulled that stunt in front of the press? You know my mother worked all week on that speech, and you ruined everything." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, slipped off my heels. I told the truth. "The truth?" He laughed bitterly. "The truth is, you stood up there and deliberately pointed fingers at my mother. You humiliated this family. You really think the public's going to side with you? A wife with no real job, no measurable value, always complaining?" I stood upright, looked him in the eye. "I had value to you when I was silent." Ryan stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You think you're special, Violet? You're just one piece in a family portrait my mother crafted. You were chosen because you knew how to listen. Because you knew your place. I'm not decor in your house, Ryan," I said slowly. "And I was never part of any portrait your mother painted." Fast footsteps echoed from behind. Evelyn appeared from the sitting room, holding a glass of red wine, her bronze silk dress shimmering under the chandelier. "What's with all the noise?" she asked, trying to sound composed, though her eyes never left me. I heard the car and knew we were in for drama. Ryan turned to her. "She stood in front of hundreds of people and disgraced this family." "I didn't disgrace anyone," I said. "I said what many out there already think. What you've been avoiding. And I simply refused to play the mute mannequin you expected." Evelyn slowly placed her glass on the wooden shelf beside the armchair. A daughter-in-law should never outshine her mother-in-law. That's the most basic rule. But you always needed to prove something. Same. I turned to her, no longer avoiding her gaze. "I'm not here to outshine anyone, only to exist without fading." The air inside the house thickened. The family portrait hanging on the wall, the Brennan standing stiffly in front of the estate, suddenly felt absurd. Each smile forced. Each pose rehearsed, but now cracks were forming, fine and splintering, too subtle for them to see. Ryan stepped closer, voice tight. "So this is your choice, to expose your own family? You know what my mother and I have done for you? We gave you opportunity, status, recognition, and this is how you repay us? No, you gave me a velvet prison." and I let myself believe it was a privilege. Ryan suddenly raised his hand. For a split second, time froze. I stood still, no flinch, no movement, no defense. I met his gaze and said, calm as ever, "Go ahead. Let the world see who you really are." His hand stalled midair. A deep voice rang out from behind me, at the front door. "And that's where you stop, Ryan." I turned. The door was open. Outside, night had fallen, and the porch light cast a warm yellow glow. My father, Captain Warren Ellis, stood there in a dark shirt and neatly pressed khaki jacket. Behind him were two men in civilian clothes. But I recognized the posture. Federal agents. Both Evelyn and Ryan froze. Dad stepped inside. His voice was steady, but not soft. "That's enough. I've heard enough." Ryan backed up. You can't?" "Can't what?" my father said, his voice dropping. "Can't protect my daughter from violence, from deceit, from coercion disguised as family?" He glanced at me, asking a question I didn't need to answer. Then he turned back to Ryan. "I have enough evidence to document financial fraud, psychological manipulation, and now, an attempted act of physical intimidation. Where would you like me to start?" Evelyn stepped forward, her smile faltering. "Mr. Ellis, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. This is a private family matter." "You're right," my father said. "But when a private family matter involves forged property transfers, a charity foundation suspected of laundering funds, and a financially controlled spouse, it becomes a legal matter." I looked at him. I saw his shoulders tremble, not with rage, but with restraint. "I'm okay," I said softly. "You're going to be more than okay." And for the first time, Ryan wasn't the one in control. Wasn't the man pulling the strings behind the scenes. He stood there, arms limp, face stripped of that polished calm he always wore. I turned to Evelyn, the woman who once believed she could mold me into a trophy for the Brennan legacy. "Thank you for showing me who I really am, Evelyn," I said, voice light but clear as glass. "And because of you, I'll never confuse power with love again. I'll never forget the moment my father placed that black case on the Brennans' coffee table. Not because of the crisp click when he opened it, but because of the look on Ryan's face. As full-color prints scattered across the table, photos, transcriptions, and every piece of evidence I had quietly gathered and handed to my father and Tessa. Texts. Bank statements. Forged contracts. Screenshots of internal emails from the foundation Evelyn had assumed were erased. All neatly arranged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with my written testimony. "This isn't a complaint driven by emotion," my father said, eyes locked on Ryan. "This is a substantiated civil investigation file. And I believe the consequences it carries will make the 3 adults in this room understand what my daughter has endured." Evelyn gripped her napkin. She no longer tried to hide the panic in her eyes. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, voice trembling like cracked glass. "This is a private family affair. You don't have the authority." "A law does," Tessa said, stepping in from the back door, carrying 2 more folders. "And from the moment you used charity funds to wire money into your daughter's account to mitigate reputational risks, this stopped being private." Ryan turned to me, his face pale. "You really did this to me?" I stood up, still gripping the envelope containing the divorce agreement Tessa had drafted. "It's not that I did this to you, Ryan. It's that I stopped ignoring what you did to me." His expression shifted, from shock to anger, then finally to despair. "The firm won't believe any of this." Tessa placed a printed copy of the Ethical Code of Conduct from the law firm, where Ryan was the youngest partner, on the table. "They already received the full documentation this morning. We sent it directly to the disciplinary board and to key clients. As of now, you're under temporary suspension. I doubt they'll keep someone facing allegations of financial fraud, document forgery, and psychological abuse of his spouse." Ryan collapsed into the chair, head bowed, one hand covering his face as if it could hide everything. Hannah showed up last, still in her yoga outfit, holding a designer water bottle with her usual flair. But when she saw my father standing there with federal agents, the smug look on her face vanished. "What is this?" she shrieked. "Who gave permission to go through my personal files?" Tessa pulled out a document. When you accepted funds under the title Community Advisory Grant from the foundation your mother runs, then transferred part of it to an anonymous account in Florida to purchase property, you violated state ethics laws. The board has received the full report. We also have internal emails between you and Evelyn Brennan outlining how to adjust the records. Hannah turned to her mother, face pale. You said all we had to do was change a few names on the invoices. Evelyn said nothing. 3 people, 3 expressions: silence, collapse, ruin. I signed the divorce agreement with steadier hands than I'd ever had. Not because I'd long awaited this day, but because I wasn't afraid anymore. Ryan didn't sign right away. He tried pleading, even suggested couples therapy, a fresh start. I answered with one sentence. No one starts over with someone who tried to erase their entire past. Evelyn said nothing as I walked out of the house. She didn't ask where I'd go, but I had already gone back to my room. The only space in that mansion that had ever held pieces of who I was, and taken back the one thing that mattered most. My mother's embroidered cloth. It had been crumpled and shoved at the bottom of a box labeled Donate. I smoothed each corner, folded it carefully like I was folding away the final years of silent endurance. My father was waiting in the driveway, no words, no questions, only the quiet motion of a car leaving behind the house where I had lived, not as a wife, but as a shadow. 3 years, 1 marriage, and 3 downfalls. Ryan lost his job, his reputation, and his marriage. Evelyn lost her power, her public image, and the community prestige she had built for nearly 2 decades. Anna lost her position, her credibility, and for the first time had to face the fact that not everyone could be bent to her will. And me, I lost something that was never really mine, and I reclaimed the one thing that mattered most, myself. I moved into a small apartment in the south side of Hartford that spring. Far enough that no one would drop by accident, but close enough that I could still drive to the community health center every day. It had 2 rooms, a low-ceilinged, old wooden floors that creaked when I walked, and a window that looked out over a small park. I didn't bring much, just a few framed photos, my mother's ceramic teapot, and the embroidered cloth, which I laid in the center of the living room like a quiet landmark of survival. It took me a few weeks to get used to silence that wasn't threatening, to morning light that didn't filter through expensive French drapes, to the feeling of opening the fridge without needing anyone's permission to buy the jam I liked. I taped a small note to the side of my bathroom mirror, a handwritten line in blue ink. I have the right to exist, not to please anyone but to be myself. 1 year later, I became the program coordinator for Heal Her, a nonprofit initiative for nurses, female doctors, and healthcare workers navigating emotionally or financially abusive relationships. I never imagined my life would take this path. Back in nursing school, I dreamed of working in pediatrics at a major hospital, writing research on emotional communication and childcare. But maybe no one starts by choosing to walk through hell. They just learn to make it useful, if they're lucky enough to survive. Violet Camden, a reporter, once asked me during a televised interview, "What's the hardest part about leaving a controlling marriage?" I smiled gently, not answering right away. The studio light shone brightly on my face, but I no longer curled inward the way I once did. "The hardest part," I said, "isn't leaving. It's believing you deserve something else." The host across from me paused for a second. Then she nodded slowly, as if she too had just realized something. The show aired on national television that evening and was shared millions of times on social media. Not because of who I was, but because of the stories I told. The story of so many women who once thought they didn't have the right to choose again. One afternoon in October, I received an email from the mayor's office in Hartford. Signed, Ava Pierce, the youngest woman ever elected mayor of the city. In the message, she recalled a small memory. "When I was 8, I was a patient in the pediatric wing where you work. I was terrified of anesthesia, and you gave me a small comic book to calm me down." I never forgot that. I reread that line over and over, quietly moved. Ava invited me to be the keynote speaker at the Women and Leadership Conference, an annual event honoring individuals and initiatives that support women recovering from crisis. "We need voices like yours," Ava wrote. "Not someone who speaks from theory, but from the lived experience of surviving and rising. The night before the conference, I stayed late at Heal Her headquarters. A new team member, Kayla, an ER nurse, just 28, knocks gently on my door, a little hesitant. Ms. Violet, I just wanted to say thank you. When I applied here, I was afraid I'd be rejected for not being strong enough. I looked at her, a faint purple mark still lingered on her wrist. This was the same young woman who once couldn't make eye contact during her first counseling session. And now? I asked. Kayla smiled softly. Now I think, maybe I'm not strong yet, but at least I'm not afraid to be weak anymore. I didn't say anything. I walked to the small bookshelf in the corner of my office and pulled out a thin wooden box. Inside were 12 handwritten letters, each one a message from a woman who had walked out of something toxic and wanted to pass hope forward. I handed Kayla one. Take it. You don't have to read it now, just know you're not alone. I stood in that room for a long time after Kayla left. The early autumn breeze slipped through the window crack, and my mother's cloth fluttered slightly, as if waving. I placed my hand over the old stitching and whispered in my heart, I'm okay now, Mom. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Not because I was stronger than anyone, but because I hadn't refused the chance to begin again, even if it came late. Maybe all of us know a Violet in our lives, a woman who endured quietly, then slowly reclaimed herself through unnamed wreckage. My story isn't an accusation. It's a soft bell ringing, reminding us that sometimes what we need most isn't a strong hand to pull us out, but a silent nod that says, you deserve more than this. And what about you? Have you ever met someone like Violet? Or maybe you are walking that path yourself, through tangled relationships and words that make you question your worth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Who knows, your words might be the light someone else is reaching for in the dark. And if you want to keep following these true stories of quiet resilience, powerful rebirths, and life reclaimed on one's own terms, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another journey.